Welcome to Real Vision Crypto and the Defiance Weekly Crypto Show, squatting unhelpfully on the fence twixt the titans of TradFi and the dashing ne'er-do-wells of RadFi, previously known as DeFi and soon to be known as anything that doesn't incur the wrath of regulators all around the world in the great theater of modern money. I'm Robin Schmidt, head of video and multimedia at the Defiant, and today I'm joined by senior editor and crypto editor at Real Vision, Ash Bennington. It's 2022, Ash. How are you feeling about everything?
I'm doing all right, man. Really interesting set of topics for us to cover today. Obviously, crypto does not sleep during the holidays.
It doesn't sleep, and it never slept. And Christmas, it don't care. It just keeps on doing its thing. Actually, the market decided to go south for Christmas, like so many of us do. And one particular New Year's Eve message I was looking at was Charles Hoskinson, de facto leader of Cardano. You pointed this one out. Was there anything in particular that you were struck by with Cardano?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting roadmap. Obviously, they're talking about the things that they're most passionate about over there, working on microfinance. Obviously, it's been a busy year for Cardano. Fully decentralized block production, I believe, in April of this year. That had been something of a sticking point for them, but they finally got that piece done. One of the things that I found really intriguing was at the top of the show, Hoskinson begins by talking about a prediction that he made for 2021, meaning in 2020 for this year. And he talks about how he'd predicted thousands of dApps and hundreds of assets. Thousands of dApps and hundreds of assets. What actually turned out was the converse. dApp production has been relatively slow at Cardano, but in terms of apps on the chain, millions of dollars worth of apps on the chain, principally in the form of NFTs this year. But it's an interesting sort of point. Nobody knows more about the Cardano ecosystem than Charles Hoskinson does. This space is very hard to make predictions about, particularly because it's just moving so quickly right now.
Well, you can make a prediction about Cardano, and there's that Charles Hoskinson will keep talking about Cardano and making promises about Cardano, some of which will happen. They just happen really, really slowly. It's very easy to bash Cardano, and I think we should. The only problem is if you do that, what happens is you get an army of reply guys on your timeline ready to tell you why you're wrong and why you don't deserve to be in crypto, which is why I don't touch it. The Cardano ecosystem is amazing because they have an enormous amount of faith in Charles and in the network in the shape of value, like $30 billion plus staked. The staking
Yeah.
rewards for Cardano, I ran some numbers today. 100,000 US dollars staked in Cardano for a year will earn you $5,500, which to my mind doesn't seem like a good bet in this space. And yet people do. And one of the things we've been looking at with Cardano specifically is, can they create liquid staking, i.e., can they unlock the value staked in Cardano in a way that then empowers an entire DeFi ecosystem? Because that's what we want to see. We want to see all that value unlocked the way they're doing it on Polkadot, for instance, which has way more favorable staking terms and an equal amount pretty much locked up, but they are producing liquid staking. Their DeFi ecosystem is interesting. Charles Hoskinson, I hate to say it, it's a cult of personality on Cardano. I made a film about them. I didn't see anything that I liked, and I would like to have my mind changed because I do feel that there's a lot of value to be unlocked there for the good of DeFi in general. But yeah, I'm a skeptic. I'll be straight up honest if it wasn't already obvious.
Hey, Robin, talk a little bit about liquid staking for people who may not know what that term means.
Oh, it's a fancy way of saying derivatives. So by staking, you lock capital in a system, basically for the good of the network. It provides security and it allows value to be kind of consolidated where you need it in an ecosystem, but then it's locked up and you can't do anything with it. What liquid staking aims to do is unlock that value. So it's allowing you to then transfer that value and move it elsewhere. And usually, you just issue a different token. Your staked value is locked up in a separate smart contract, and then it's released elsewhere. And then anyone can buy that token back and release the staked value. It's just allowing liquidity to happen where it wasn't possible before. And with Kasama and Akala, you're able to do that now on the Polkadot network. But there's all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening on Polkadot that are kind of fascinating. And I just want to see Cardano kind of deconstipate itself and unlock all of that value. Sorry, the turkey is still riding inside. Interestingly enough, though, Charles also said he wants a real person in Kenya or somewhere with a blockchain-based identity and credit scores, stablecoin on the other side. Cardano is the settlement rail. if you didn't know already, I actually used to work for Harmony, and one of the things that we looked at very closely with Harmony was cross-border payments,
Yeah.
moving capital from one side to another. It's really easy to sell that idea and really easy to talk about Western Union and sending money all over the world and the burden of payments. But for a lot of countries, that's a massive source of revenue. But it's also, there's so many big players in there. Shifting them, good luck. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, good luck. We looked at it and I was like, no.
I would say Charles was very early to this party. He was talking about the use case for emerging markets way back in 2016, 2017 vintage, and about why this is an important use case. And I think his views about this are based on sort of really sincere convictions about the challenges that are faced in emerging market economies with things like obviously very high transaction costs, high cross-border payment costs, and also the challenge about things around rule of law in certain places in the world where you don't have the ability to, for example, have access to collateral through a traditional legal system. And I think Charles has done some really deep thinking early in this space before others were talking about it on precisely those issues.
Yeah, there was the whole banking the unbanked issue, and that hasn't really gone away. There've been various attempts to do that. What I think is interesting, and it kind of leads us nicely onto our next topic, which is CBDCs and the response of banks to this, in particular countries where they don't necessarily have the most robust banking systems. We've seen the sand dollar in the Bahamas, and now we were looking at Jamaica launching its first CBDC pilot. How are you viewing this? Because it's quite big, I think, the whole CBDC movement. I think it's going to move pretty fast.
Yeah, I think that's right. CBCs are definitely coming. The PBOC, this is the People's Bank of China, recently launched a pilot app, a wallet app for the ECNY. This is their CBDC. It's, I think, fourth or fifth different name, ECNY now. But look, this is something that is clearly going to be coming down the pike. Why? Because it gives central banks an incredible tool set, an incredible degree of control over the way the liquidity in a financial system, in an economy flows. So I suspect this is something that we're going to be hearing more about. By the way, it also makes sense to hear that relatively small economies are adopting these early, smaller system, easier to do, but also probably the thought being that you can get some competitive advantage here by starting early. I don't know, Robin, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, that the ECNY is fascinating. I was kind of tracking it all through last year because the numbers that the PBOC were putting out there in terms of the pilot. I mean, this was not a small pilot; it was enormous,
Yeah.
absolutely enormous. And China, as it obviously does, wants to showcase its might to the world. February the 4th, Winter Olympics. They're doing some wild things. They're actually trying to get it rolled out for that, and they've got these bizarre things like ski gloves um, with near field communication built into them, so you don't need a network. It can just do it device to device. This is going to happen real fast. I think 2022 is the year we see the death of cash, if I'm honest. Like physical cash, goodbye. I think it's been accelerated by COVID, but it's interesting. And to your point about the Bank of Jamaica, what's interesting about CBDCs is that you can buy them off the shelf. So you can basically just buy a pre-built system and then adopt it. Unlike physical currency, it's a lot harder to do that and mint it and all those costs associated with that. Like a digital currency, bosh, you just fork it, make it your own, brand it, and off you go.
Right.
That accelerates the rollout and the adoption very, very quickly. And I think you're right that there are moves afoot in countries in the Caribbean, for instance, where they're just going to get it done. They're just going to get it done, and they'll make it easy to move money between them as well. Because why wouldn't you? It's going to go so fast,
Yeah,
so fast.
exactly. Smaller, more nimble, able to operate on this. By the way, I'll take the opposite side of your bet, Robin. I think cash is still going to be here in 2023.
Okay, the slow decline. No, I think there are certain countries where they've been very quick to do this. Like Sweden has been very, very quick to remove physical cash. I think China's just going to do it.
Yeah.
The way that China just got rid of those emissions producing mopeds literally overnight. Suddenly all the mopeds became electric, and that massive problem that China had, this emissions problem they had with vehicles, just went. They have this ability to brute force a solution into being in a way that is just truly remarkable. I sort of admire it, but while also being utterly terrified by it, as we should be.
Yeah, well, when you don't have that whole messy democracy thing to contend with,
I know, right?
quickly.
I think benevolent dictatorships are the way forward. And it's interesting that also brings us very nearly to some of the Web3 confusion around Mr. Jack Dorsey's very pithy tweet. Did you read that one about Web3? He says, you don't own Web3, the VCs and their LPs do. It will never escape their incentives. It's ultimately a centralized identity with a different label. Know what you're getting into. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I saw that as well. It's really interesting. Obviously, Jack Dorsey has become a very big fan of Bitcoin proper. This is more of the same, consistent with that thesis. Look, I think it's interesting. Obviously, it's always fun when billionaires post things that sound a little bit controversial. But this is a rift that's been in the system for some time now. I'm curious, where do you fall on this one?
So I'm always when stuff like this comes out, I'm always looking for the note beneath the note, because like I don't think Jack necessarily hates Web3 per se, and I don't think he necessarily hates smart contract platforms either per se. He clearly hates VCs, so it's manifesting itself in this kind of contrary position, and he's probably found some allies in the Bitcoin position. But Jack sells NFTs. It's not like he's counter to this. And I'm just wondering, was Jack trying to raise money for something and got rejected and now he's bitter? I don't know. The thing is, Jack's not wrong. That's what is ultimately true about all of this, that there are a lot of VCs that filled the gap where ICOs were creating funding like we've never seen before. And then that all dried up, but these protocols still need money. And so then they've shacked up with VCs, some of whom are very benevolent, are actually what I would call progressive. And those are the ones that were the quickest to reply to Jack and tell him how badly he was wrong. But actually, the ones that stayed silent were the ones he was talking about. And it's true. It's entirely true. So I think it's good that he spoke up like this. It's good that the debate's out there. And it's very, very reductive to just say, oh, well, Jack's a Bitcoin maximalist. But that's exactly what everybody did. I think there's a lot more nuance to that. And I think ultimately, yeah, he's not wrong.
I like this idea. The note beneath the note is those who stayed silent maybe feel the most threatened. That's the thesis.
Something like that. Well, what happened was there was a kind of cascading liquidation of follows, if we can use the right terminology, on Twitter.
Yeah.
Everyone got cancelled because that's what you do now. And
or self canceled, right? It was
Mark Andreessen blocked him, and I mean, it's probably the weakest move anywhere. A rage quit, and if a rage unsubscribe is even weaker. So it's just like, okay, guys, handbags, billionaire handbags, but it's good theater, and whatever. But I think we keep coming back to this idea of decentralization theater and DeFi in its very naming. That's why I kind of gave the intro that I did. Like, we need a better word than decentralized finance, because ultimately it's not really. It's more like open finance, which is a better name for it. But that doesn't sound as sexy as decentralized finance. OFI. Oh, fi. It's like, I don't know. But clearly regulators are looking at decentralized or pseudo decentralized entities and saying, well, you are and you're not, and you are and you're not. And Bitcoin maximalists go, well, we are. But of course, there's concentrations of power on the Bitcoin network as well. A lot of it was in China, but that's sort of moving and spreading now. And a lot of it's moving to the US, a lot of it's moving to Russia. Weirdly, a lot of it's moving to Germany. I have no idea why, but that's just kind of clearly where there's a Bitcoin hotbed. But, decentralization is a meme. It's a sliding scale. It's not a real thing. I don't know, but it's going to be hotly debated.
Yeah, it might have something to do with this sort of the ancestral fear of inflation in the minds of Germans, even successive generations coming forward from the Weimar Republic. There's been this just sort of visceral sense. Even today, when you talk to young Germans, people in their 20s, there's just this sense that inflation really is the worst thing that could ever befall an economy. So perhaps it does make sense.
From the US perspective, because I mean, I look at what's going on in the US, and it's very easy to be skeptical as a Euro citizen and just go, you guys, I mean, like, you just tie everything up in gridlock and nothing gets done and nothing gets legislated. Is inflation an existential risk over there, or is it just going to get sorted out by some kind of magic economic paintbrush?
Well, we don't know. That's the short answer, right? Obviously, the Fed has maintained their position that inflation is transitory related to the reopening trade, a kind of rebound effect in the view of the Fed in terms of their official statements. Look, inflation is running really, really hot at 40-year highs by different indicators, CPI, PCE. These numbers are absolutely cranking. So we don't really know Actually, obviously, it's impossible to predict the future trajectory, but I think it's fair to say that it's reasonable to be concerned.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jack himself gave that hyperinflation tweet. So, it's very clear where he stands. But it's also really easy to be put off by Jack and put off by these billionaires. It's like, well, it's okay for you. And I mean, that we need a certain level of advocacy, but it needs to be advocacy at all sorts of different levels. And you brought up a fair point about Charles and his identification of emerging markets as places where this
Yeah.
can do the most good, but we sort of lose sight of all of that. And from a Euro perspective, we look at US regulators and think, there's a whole world out there, and it's not just about you. But of course, the US dollar exerts this enormous influence over everything. And from our world, stable coins and whether they will exist and whether they will survive, regulatory scrutiny next year, it's going to be fascinating. One project that didn't survive was Polymarket, which the US Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, shut them down. So it was an Ethereum predictions market platform, and they had to pay a 1.4 million penalty. And yeah, that's it. They were sued for offering off-exchange event-based binary option contracts. So
Yeah.
things are starting to happen. We sort of thought this might happen this year, and this was the first of it. I don't know where this is going to end up. I think everyone who's working in DeFi will probably lawyer up at this
But
point.
Well, the interesting thing about Polymarket was something that I've been saying for a really long time, which is if a product looks like a regulated financial product, in the case of Polymarket, unregulated, unregistered swaps, there are going to be regulators, in this case CFTC, who are going to take that position that these are, in fact, financial products. I expect we're going to see more of this to come here in 2022.
Yeah, I remember back in 2017, we were talking about security tokens and about how this was going to be a game changer. Never happened because the regulatory had issues there. Just getting those approved was almost impossible, like
Well,
security tokens. But I mean, is it time? I don't know.
yeah, I think that's exactly right. Never happened versus hasn't happened yet. They look the same, I guess, when you're looking backward, but when you're looking forward, I think it's pretty clear that there are a lot of people who see the utility in distributed networks and want to do registered offerings, registered products, things that SEC has approved as securities. I think the challenge with this is the ATSs. These are the alternative trading systems, the computer exchanges that function as stock exchanges, not really yet kind of up to industrial strength, maybe where they need to be to do this. I suspect this is something that isn't going away. I think we're going to hear a lot more about registered security tokens in 2022 and 2023. Look, this stuff moves at the speed of traditional finance. That means it moves at the speed of regulators, not at the speed of software. So these things can take a while. But I think we have a juggernaut building underneath the surface here. Why? Well, all the advantages that decentralized systems provide, things like 24/7 access. Obviously, you can't get that if you're trading registered securities on exchange today in 2022. Of course, you can trade them in ECNs. But look, this just offers manifold advantages. The ability to offer registration and granular detail on the reporting of securities with things like ownership for AML KYC, and also the ability to do things like understand at a very granular level, a precise, up-to-date, second-by-second level where securities are in terms of rehypothecation. This was something that we saw as a major problem during the 2007-2008 financial crisis. So I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about it this year, next year, and the year after.
Well, it's wonderful that we can actually have this discussion and this debate, knowing that people are actually taking notice of it and things actually might kind of grind into life. It'll be interesting to see who the big players end up being, or whether, existing legacy players just open an arm that does exactly this. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
becoming increasingly difficult from our perspective to track it all. That's what I'm very, very aware of at the moment, because there is this extraordinary well of innovation going on. We're just looking at projects today that are just taking some of the big ideas that were fresh in December and are now old, and bundling them together to create something completely new. And you look at it, you go, how on earth are you supposed to make sense of this? This thing is so fresh, so new, and the ideas make sense, but then, by probably March, it'll have evolved into something else completely. It's wild. And yet,
Well,
as you rightly say, it's solving problems. There are things that can actually be made better through all of this.
Well, Robin, other than being great job security for you and me, I think that you bring up a really important point here, and it actually harkens back to something I was saying earlier about the speed and the different sort of philosophies of these two spaces. So it seems to me, and maybe I'm just being an optimist here, but it seems to me that we're going, or maybe a pessimist, depending upon your perspective on this question, I guess. But it seems to me that you have these two sides of this coin here, which desperately need each other. People who are in the DeFi space, people who have been in the digital asset space for a long time have the kind of skills and know-how that just don't exist in traditional banks. I think it's been pretty clear that we've seen some of these centralized products that have been attempted by some of the large commercial and retail banks here in the U.S. and elsewhere. They haven't picked up any traction. Conversely, there's a real need, I think, for people who are in the DeFi space to try to understand the legal regulatory compliance infrastructure that surrounds traditional financial products. These are really considerable challenges. If you've ever worked in a bank, you know the extent to which legal, regulatory, and compliance manages every aspect of your day-to-day existence. That's something that's going to be hard to adopt. If something isn't sort of natively in your DNA, it's very hard for an organization when it's something that's very central to the core operational functionality of an organization to do. So what does that mean? I think what it probably translates to, Robin, is a couple of different alternatives. Perhaps we'll see all of them: mergers, acquisitions, partnerships, the APIification of the financial services stack, meaning you're going to see the ability for different players in different places and different locations in the financial services stack to provide their own solutions that will process straight through APIs. I think we're going to see all of these things in 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, and alongside that, you see this cross-pollination of human talent that's moving from one side to another. And of course, they still have their Rolodexes and they still have people on speed dial that they can actually then have those conversations on the right level with. So I think you're right. I think that's all going to accelerate. Interestingly enough, the final topic, and we'll end as we always do on NFTs. Samsung has announced an NFT platform for its smart TVs, and Samsung has a kind of history of doing this. They'll announce something crypto related and then it kind of just sits there and they don't do anything with it. But NFTs, and particularly culture, don't really care about regulation. You can't regulate a song or a piece of art. So it feels like as a mechanism or a vehicle for ideas to at least be transmitted, that there's still something interesting going on here. Have you bought an ape yet?
No, Robin, when you stake me, I'll buy my first ape.
Slim Shady, Eminem, he bought an ape. They call it Eminape now. He spent $460,000. I mean, we keep seeing this. We keep seeing more and more celebrities and more people in kind of hip hop, basketball, urban culture space buying these things, and it just keeps on picking up speed. I'm always shocked every day about just how far this idea can go, and people seem to kind of be they welcome it in ways that if I try and have a conversation with people about cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin, it's usually an eye roll I get back. I'm like, oh God, this again. But like, I'll show them a picture of a monkey and they have a very different reaction. Usually they're just like, what? But still, it's a lot more positive, I find.
Well, this is really interesting. I think both of these stories are actually related. So what's interesting to me, first of all, Eminem, fantastic artist. I grew up listening to him. He's always been ahead of the curve. He gets humor. He gets irony. It makes perfect sense that he would ape into the Bored Ape Yacht Club. But I would also say this. Look, one of the reasons why I think we've seen so much adoption by celebrities, music, athletes, culture in general, is these are people who have amazing teams around them, supporting them on their financial side, supporting them on the tech side. The reality is that these are still very challenging products to access. And when Eminem finds something interesting artistically, and he's sitting around with people who work with him to get this thing sorted out, and he has a question, there are 17 people who jump in and say, hey, Slim, let me show you how that works. The reality is, for most individuals, even people who find the Bored Ape Yacht Club art really cool and interesting, it's challenging for people to access that space. Okay, enter the Samsung story. So we don't really know what the technology is yet. We don't know whether or not it will be successful. This was just announced. But here's the thing. The idea that the minute you buy your TV from Best Buy, you pay $300 or $400 for it, you hang it on the wall. The fact that you could have access to an app store that would allow you to purchase NFTs. This is something that's very powerful when we talk about something that has been a theme here that we've talked about here on the show, Defiant and Real Vision, and we've talked about more broadly, which is this idea of the challenges with user interface, user experience, UI, UX. Look, I'm sure that the purists will say that the Samsung solution is too centralized or that they don't really like it. But the reality is, how do you bring more people into this space? I actually recently sat down with the head of the MetaMask product over at Consensus, and I jokingly said to him, my mom still does not have a MetaMask wallet. Well, my mom has a TV. And she uses the apps on that TV. And if you have the ability to purchase NFTs through an app store or through some kind of like hardwired experience that just comes native on your television, that's something that starts to open this up to a much broader audience. Now, with regard to this particular product, as I said, we don't know whether or not it will succeed, but I think it's a harbinger of what we're going to see coming about the democratization of this and the ability of expanding access to the kinds of things that you and I have been passionate about for a long time. You know, I always say, look, I'm really fortunate to be on this show with you and Cam. You guys are two of the leading experts in this space who are watching the entire way this ecosystem is unfolding. But, you know, you talk to people you went to high school with on Facebook and you realize they're like, well, this is kind of interesting, but what the hell is an NFT? People still don't know. They have no idea how to access these products outside of the space that you and I spend our lives in. So this is something that I think is a really interesting development, and I suspect we're going to see more of it again. Something we keep saying here on this first show of 2022, we're going to see more of it coming in the new year.
Something really odd happened to me yesterday. One of probably the biggest Hollywood stars of the last 20 years reached out to me and that wants to have a conversation and just literally do an onboard session, but we'll do it on camera to say, okay, this is what an NFT is. And it came about because, as you rightly said, his team understands this stuff. But the reason it landed on me is because I've made a selection of films that weren't about what you should buy, but more about the cultural side of it. And now people who I look up to and respect as having created culture for the last, God knows how long. I mean, I spoke to Ice Cube last year. I mean, that was mind blowing. I'm having a chat with Ice Cube about NFTs. Like, what planet does that happen on? So strange. And then this happened. I'm like, actually, as you rightly said, we're creating the tools for people to access this space. And so I'm suddenly starting to feel much more of a tremendous responsibility to get it right, to do my homework, but also to do more to kind of make it accessible and open it up. And as you rightly said, like those Samsung TVs make all of this a lot more palatable, and it'd be very easy to scroll through and select an NFT the same way you would a Netflix show and everything else. And that UX, I mean, Samsung knows how to do UX. So it's a very interesting year that we're opening up. Definitely feels like still work to be done, but I'm much more optimistic about things than I've been. Well, at least I felt, particularly the beginning of 2019, for instance. That was a very different world we were in. Curious where your head's at.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I think you framed it exactly right. This idea of building up experiences in the digital asset space that resemble experiences that people already have today. Look, tens of millions of Americans pick movies on Netflix, on Amazon Prime, on their television. It's something that is a very seamless experience for just about everyone in the United States today. So yeah, it's really hard not to be optimistic when you see stories like the Samsung story, and when you see just the level of cultural pickup it's getting. The Eminem story being one example, but obviously there have been other athletes and entertainers who've been in the space before. Yeah, hard not to feel optimistic about this space, isn't it?
It is. It is. Well, I'm still having fun, and I'm still finding myself challenged every day by learning about something that I simply don't understand, and I have to kind of go through all the documentation and really wrap my head around it. But I like that. And there was a lot of chat at the end of the year from people saying, well, this is my prediction for 2022, and this is my, this is what happened in 2021, and here's how I was right. And I actually look at 2022 as I don't want to be right about everything. I want to be right about nothing. I would much rather know very, very little and be completely on the back foot and have that rush of excitement as I discover all of the new things and all of the things that are now evolving and changing. I'd much rather be wrong about everything. And that way I won't be settled, and I'll be hungry and foolish and all the stupid things that, come out of management textbooks. But that's the way I'm approaching 2022, from a place of I know nothing, and I'm very happy there. But that's personally where I like to be.
Robin, are you still going to hang out with us when you start spending time with movie stars?
Of course. I keep it real, man. Keeping it real. I am not wearing any pants. No, I am. Listen, Ash, it's been fantastic having you on the show. Have you got any final thoughts for us as we smash our way through the doors of 2022?
Just that we're going to be here doing this all in the coming year. Looking forward to doing it with you, man.
Absolutely. Well, we will return next week. I'm not sure who's going to be on the show, but of course, we will keep an eye on the best stories coming out there and deliver them to you with all the articulateness that we can summon to these mouths of ours. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you next week.